Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a very special guest, somebody who I talked to last year in June. His name is Johnny Cirucci. He has a new book that has just come out titled The Eaters of Children, The Pedocracy Exposed. But we talked about, last time when we talked, me and Johnny talked about his first book, Illuminati Unmasked, Everything You Need to Know About the New World Order and How to Beat It. And it was a remarkable conversation, not only because we talked about that book, also because the first hour I was talking to Juanita Broderick, and that was June 12th, 2016. So I was one of the early people before President Trump even brought her out onto the public stage. I conversed with her about her retelling her experience with former President Bill Clinton. So that's just something memorable that I remember. But Johnny has a website, Johnny Cirucci. Cirucci is spelled CIRUCCI.com, and you can contact him there. Also, he has a Facebook page and a Twitter page. He has also, in between Illuminati Unmasked and Eaters of Children, he wrote a book called The Secret History, The Erased Clues That Prove Who Rules the World from Beyond the Curtain. That was published in November 2016. This book, the most recent book, just came to my attention. He had posted something on Facebook, so I'd seen Eaters of Children. It was published September 11th, 2017. It's got 693 pages. So one of the things that was very remarkable about his first book, Illuminati Unmasked, which I read, was the level of detail and references. You had I think it was something like 1,900 footnotes on that first book. So I assume this book has the same type of very detailed and rigorous referencing, which I really like. But Johnny, welcome to the show.
William, it's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate you agreeing to this on short notice. And this book is really timely. The subject, this topic could be very disturbing to listeners. So I just want to forewarn them that we're going to talk about pedophilia and how it is this thing that is really being exposed all over the world, in the U.S., the U.K. So Johnny's going to go ahead and talk about that. But before we get to the book, Johnny, why don't you talk a little bit about your background?
Sure. And I agree with you. I want to put out a warning that, unfortunately, sex crimes affect a very, very large number of people. So just to watch yourselves in the audience, especially if last thing I want to do is to trigger bad memories. But who I am, let's see. I born and raised on the East Coast in the Philadelphia metro area on the Jersey side. Italian, Roman Catholic, fourth-generation immigrants, and I've come to find out myself that the ways of Italian and Irish immigrants were unfortunately facilitated by Rome, by the Vatican, in order to inundate America and the United States with Roman Catholic immigrants. And the problem for Rome in that time, in the 20s and 30s, was that immigrants assimilated. There was a process. Legal immigrants assimilated, and that's what happened to my family. It kind of backfired on them. Grateful for the second chance from Italy. My family went uphill, fought hard to establish themselves, became proud Americans, and that kind of instilled rights-leaning, patriotic values in me and pushed me into the military. I spent about 20 years in the Army and the Marine Corps, and unfortunately I had kind of a tough family background. An abusive father, left when I was 20, and it gave me a bad attitude, William. It gave me kind of like a disrespect for authority, and I think that kind of carried over into my military career. I spent 20 years in the military and was miserable almost all the time, particularly during my time overseas. It just was, I wanted so much out of it and got so little out of it. Well, so little of what I wanted. I certainly got a lot of experience and knowledge, and because my life experiences caused me to question authority, and I had strong values. When, for instance, I went to college, I wrote for the university paper, and that gave me some experience in writing, but also in backing up my strong opinion, my very strong opinions. And so that's where it began, this obsession to as somebody that's always kind of, especially in, it was a liberal public university out west, and so I was constantly fighting, constantly debating, and it taught me how to do that, how to not give my own opinion, but instead try to give facts from quote reputable sources, and that is what I think leads into my what I would consider relatively unique style. I call it the italic suspended style because sometimes my citations in the book are so long they make me nervous that they're too long. But as I was going through my military career, I shied away from quote mainstream media because it seemed to have a left-wing bent, and sort of gravitated towards right-wing but still mainstream sources: Rush Limbaugh, Mark Levin, Sean Hannity, Bill O'Reilly, all those guys. And it was okay for a couple of years, but they seemed to have their needle stuck. They seemed to say the same things over and over and over again. And it was the advent of the Obama presidency, with his shady background that no one in that arena questioned, that really started to tick me off and get embittered with these sources of information. What broke me from it all was the supposed killing of Osama bin Laden in 2011. I had not only was the official story ludicrous and changed repeatedly, but I also had military sources that admitted that the official story was false, was untrue. I mean, here you have the most valuable intelligence assets in the entire so-called war on terror, and SEAL Team 6 was ordered to shoot him on sight and dump him in the ocean. Come on, really? So that was what pushed me off into what we know as so-called alternative media. And I found the same situation in alternative media. But before I hit that point, and I was still in college, I had a unique religious experience. I became a born-again Christian. I went to a local church there in college, and changed me strongly from a non-practicing Catholic to a pretty passionate born-again Christian. So that's my bias, and fit very well. I felt like I had come home because it fit my values, and I was like, well, this is where I always wanted to be. And so back into my transition to media sources, as I started to look into alternative media, I had a similar situation. It seemed like folks in alternative media were saying the same things. They were giving me a little bit more truth than mainstreams, but they weren't giving me the whole truth. It was like just giving me symptoms here and there. I was listening to alternative media, came across a guy who started giving names, places, and dates in regards to the Vatican's involvement in history, politics, military, everything. And me being, let me back up, when I was also writing columns for my university paper, I started to blog too. And so all that time, from the 90s on to 2004, to 2010, all the way up to I'm constantly writing and researching, but not doing it seriously, not just kind of like dabbling in it. And so when I finally heard this guy giving this information on the Vatican and the order of the Jesuits, I'm taking notes as I'm listening, and I'm looking this up for myself, and I was like, wow, oh my goodness, everything this guy is saying, I can verify. And so I started to blog on that, and one of my columns did unusually well for me, and I figured that was the point where I needed to go ahead and put this in a book. I didn't really want to write a book because I was intimidated by it, and I didn't think I had the patience for it. I really don't, but that was Illuminati Unmasked in 2015, and then the next year I wanted to do kind of explain what I call the Jesuit world order, the matrix of web of lies that have been created. It was my intent to do that as instead what I ended up doing was the historical background to Illuminati Unmasked, which was secret history, is all the history that went into Illuminati Unmasked looked at in detail. And then it was really with the advent of the Trump-Clinton campaign and so-called Pizzagate, that the stuff that was child sex slave trafficking, I was aware of it, but had not really focused on it to do deep research. The Pizzagate stuff brought it all to the surface, and the deeper I looked, the more upsetting it was, the more clear it was that there was more than enough material to write a book on. And basically, the long and short of it, William, is it's the gateway to power. It is the elite who are controlled, the 1% who control power everywhere, from the CIA to Hollywood to London, are I call them Luciferians, really, really evil people that they ensure the loyalty of their followers, by getting them to commit the most heinous acts you can think of, which is the rape, torture, and ritual slaughter of the innocent, children, animals, anything, infants, toddlers. I just saw an article from the Daily Caller that was just out a couple of days ago about how no fewer than 11 mayors have had been accused of or been arrested for some sort of sex crime.
Right.
On top of that list is
Seattle or something, was it? Was it guy
Ed Murray in Seattle. Murray in Seattle.
Yeah, that's right.
But
and more people are coming out. It's almost like Cosby or something, where everybody said, "Well, I was a victim too. I was a victim too." And that's how big is Seattle? The top 10 or top 20 cities in the country.
Absolutely, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, brother. It's just tip of the iceberg. So Giuliani, go ahead.
I was just going to say, let's go. When you wrote your book, you kind of went back into the beginnings of history and kind of covered some of these other cases. Because I see the Phrygian Freedom, the first orgy island. I mean, maybe we can start at the beginning because this kind of behavior is recorded in the Old Testament, where they're, throwing children to Baal, and these weird sex cults are taking place outside of Israel. So, this guy, and even Crowley, and I know a lot about Crowley, reference a lot of these child sex and child sacrifice type things, So.
Absolutely. And that's why, because it's so ancient, almost timeless, I do discuss a little bit, or try to explain it in spiritual terms, even though not everybody reaches a Christian explanation of spiritual terms. Most people who consider themselves religious do agree in the basic concepts of a bad entity that most people call the devil, and a good entity that most people reference as God. So I think that's a fair place for me to explain why this appears to be so timeless and so all-encompassing. I go all the way back to Babylon and really
Rome. Rome, Greek. I think one of the Roman emperors was involved in pedophilia. The one that preceded Little Boot Caligula.
Little Boot Caligula. Absolutely, good for you. Yeah. I was going to give for instance the Greek Titan Cronus supposedly castrated his own father Uranus and married his sister. Gotcha. And through his father's genitalia in the ocean, and I think that's the oh my goodness, I have that later. That is the let's see, that what came out, the Furies came out of the froth. Yeah. So and then Tiberius is the emperor who was so diseased and consumed with lust that he retreated. He was actually too overboard as a Roman emperor and retreated to the island of Capri.
Capri, that's right.
And there he had victims, children brought to him for his sexual gratification, to rape them, to torture them, and
then he would chuck them off a cliff when he was done, or make them kill them too, right?
Absolutely. In sport or whatever, any perverse thing that he could think of, he did, and he brought Caligula into this, and as a result, Caligula ended up the way he did, and.
The rumor is Caligula killed Tiberius, right, or suffocated him with a pillow.
That is an unproven rumor, at least from historical sources. But what isn't a rumor is that Caligula was deeply in love with his own sister, Drusilla, and had sex with all three of his sisters. And when Drusilla died early, it was part of what made Caligula lose his mind, as well as his own diseased, lust-filled, he was
really
just
incredible. Just as bad as Tiberius. They say that there was a boat they would put out on one of the lakes outside of Rome, and there were human sacrifices that would take place there. So
absolutely, and so this is part of why, when I say exposes across history, why is it so consistent that people in power seem to want to partake of their power by doing these unbelievably heinous acts? And I explain this as the ultimate, the Sauron at the eye, the great eye is Sauron, the devil, whatever you want to call him, is the master, the interdimensional master of this, and he requires, as a show of loyalty, if you want access to this system. Right. I call it kind of like a devil's simulation, a demonic version of The Sims, of a large, complex video game of like Age of Empires or whatnot, right. Simulation game where you build nations and so forth. Certainly, if for Jews and Christians, there is. References to that of entities that control whole nations. That's particularly found in Daniel. But I explain this as this is kind of like a parasitic simulation over top of what I, as a Christian, call God's creation, and it requires the loyalty for power. And I use this as an example in my book, how the devil takes Jesus to a high mountain and tempts him with all the kingdoms. That's because at that point, that was his sword. He controlled all the money, the power, the kingdoms, and he requires that, as far as I'm concerned, to this very day. If you want to partake in power, you have to show your loyalty. The ultimate selfishness is to turn off your humanity to abuse children. As a matter of fact, one of the examples of mayors, let's see, I pull it up here. One of the examples of mayors who was accused of a crime was accused of assaulting a toddler that was 4 years old.
Wow. This is the recent stories?
Yeah, let me see here.
That's
Where was
incredible.
that? Shoot. Yeah, it's really sick how often you come across. Here it is. It was former Ohio Mayor Richard Keenan, a Democrat, listen to this, a Democrat, the only time I have ever seen a sex offender given a life sentence. He served 10 years and will soon be eligible for parole. Richard Keenan assaulted a 4-year-old. And this is actually very, very common. Infants and toddlers. You think, okay, so everybody has these unguarded moments when you might find a young teenager appealing in some way. No, man. These people go after children so young they have not even matured. There's nothing sexual in the slightest bit about these small children, and that's who they go after to rape, torture, abuse, and ritually slaughter. And it just proves that there is something
else going on, yeah, something like demonic, yeah. Well, do you know two of Senator Schumer's guys? It was one guy's name was Schwartz, and then the other is the guy got caught up with Huma Abedin's husband, Weiner, right? They were both pedophiles. I mean, they both had child porn and everything, man. Like, this
I got news
recent.
for you, man.
Yeah.
When you see something like Lauren Coleman from the Bigfoot community sent me a report on Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz tweeted something pornographic and immediately came back, oh, that wasn't me, that was a staffer.
Right. Yeah,
when you see this stuff about so-and-so's staffer is a pedophile or obsessed with pornography, that is the tip of the iceberg.
Right. That's all. Like, why are people surrounding themselves with people like that?
Oh,
right?
because that's what they are.
Right.
That's
birds
what
of a feather,
they are.
right? Yeah.
All the way to the top. You are not granted access. Donald Trump has been sued by a woman who said when she was 13 years old, he raped her on Jeffrey Epstein's Orgy Island, which is, his version of Capri.
Right. It is. I mean, that building there that's on the Orgy Island, it has an occult design. It's blue and gold. It has, like, weird statues on top of it.
It is their own religion, and it is the same timeless religion that goes all the way back.
It's the ancient religion. And Epstein's a very strange character. He came out of nothing. He used to be
a school teacher.
Right.
He was a school teacher, and all of a sudden he got plugged into stocks and Wall Street.
It was the Wexler family, the billionaire family of the people. And he's probably a Mossad agent and all that stuff.
Here's why. Because they love to use Jews as patsies. That's why he was enabled. He's no big stock guy.
No way. He's a total front. Yeah,
he is the middleman for us. If there's any focus at all on this issue, that's who we see. We don't see anybody higher than him.
Never.
Now,
and have you ever heard the story of Ghislaine Maxwell? Like Robert Maxwell.
Same thing.
Same
thing. She's got Jewish roots too.
Oh, yeah, but Robert Maxwell was just a criminal, Mossad. I mean, the Mossad probably killed him. But the interesting thing is that this is like the intelligence, but there's also something else because Maxwell himself was a rake too. He had all kinds of prostitutes.
Whenever you see, and I cover that in depth in the book, whenever you see this military intelligence connection, for instance, the Wonderland Club is a pornographic European-based child porn, kiddie porn.
That was a huge bust, right?
Well, that's what the media said. A huge bust. That like 140 different police agencies. You know how many kids they rescued? One.
Wow, that's nothing.
One. And with when as far as the big net that came in, trailer park trash and school janitors and no one of substance whatsoever. Right. The Wonderland Club was using KGB encryption codes in order to facilitate. And you know what the buy-in for the club was?
No.
10,000 images of kiddie porn. Wow. 10,000. You imagine how plugged in you have to be to an illegal activity to collate 10,000 illegal images. It is completely systemic. It rises all the way to the top. Key people are thoroughly controlled. Cops, judges, prosecutors.
It's like a blackmail thing. When was the Wonderland? When was that whole bust? I don't remember exactly the dates of that. Oh. Is it the 90s? I mean, it was a while back, right? Wasn't it the very beginning of the internet? I don't remember.
I'm showing the bust was in 2001, which means the club was running for decades before that.
Right. Like it was message boards and all that stuff.
13 countries, 180 men, led by British officers, 104 arrests. They rescued 2 children, and one of them was actually only rescued one. Suspects included. This was from the the Observer. It wasn't even colored by covered by the Mail or the Guardian, by the Observer. Suspects included the usual collection of outsiders, unemployed loners in UK bedsits. I don't know what a bedsit is. A father and son in a U.S. trailer park. Come on, really?
Wow.
Really?
That's crazy. Where was the bust? Was it in Europe?
Supposedly it took place simultaneously in 1998 across, 13 countries, and 104, like I said, 13 countries, 104 arrests, 107 homes, and nobody bigger than someone out of a trailer park trash.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Come on, really? Meanwhile, let's see. The head. You've got people running the CIA and MI6 deeply involved with this stuff. You've got, how many times have we come across the so-called rent boy scandals?
Right.
Whether it was in the 80s for the Reagan Bush,
right,
or decades across the UK. Decades across.
Oh yeah, tons. Was it Jerry Spence or whatever? What was his name? The guy from
Spence.
He met an untimely death. Yeah.
I think he was it was ABC or CBS. He was actually a Vietnam War reporter. He got involved in the drug trade, and he was having serious parties.
Yeah, it was interesting. There was a Sean Hannity was in a conversation of a guy who was involved with the Spence rent boy cover-up. He was an older reporter, and
Craig Spence, not Gary Spence.
Sorry, Gary Spence was an attorney. Sorry about that.
No. See, you kidding me? I can't recall all the stuff I looked up myself. So Spence was listening to these parties. He was having generals and CIA officers, and see if I can get a list of people.
Newscasters, yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
See if I get a list. Where do I have? Oh, William Casey. William Roman Catholic Casey, CIA director. He had a party. Ted Koppel. William Sapphire.
That's what I was going to say. So it was Ted Koppel was talking to Hannity this year. And I'm like, that guy, there's Koppel's involved, and he was seen with like a 14-year-old boy or a 15-year-old boy. Koppel.
Hannity, Irish Catholic Hannity on Night of Malta, Rupert Murdoch's Fox News. You're not going to get anything real out of them. Dame of Malta, Phyllis Schlafly was there on one of his parties. Yale Skull and Bones CIA operative Ambassador James Lilly was there. Homosexuals, extreme deviant, Commandant of the Marine Corps Alfred M. Gray, went to Spence parties. And the problem for poor Spence is Mr. Craig Spence was that he tried to do the CIA's trick without the CIA's knowledge, which was to film people in blackmailable instances.
It was a one-way mirror or whatever, two-way mirror.
Yeah, and so unfortunately for him, he kind of got depressed pretty quickly. So
he just wanted to commit suicide.
Yeah. He just wasn't
to a
up to
hotel room. Yeah.
It was ABC that he worked for as a correspondent, blowing a lot of smoke for the Vietnam War.
Yeah. Here's the thing. This is from David McGowan. One of the White House tours occurred just after Spence stopped by a Nightline studio to see his friend Ted Koppel. So he's friends with Spence, Ted Koppel. Spence reportedly introduced Koppel to a 15-year-old boy, whom Koppel later claimed Spence had introduced as his son. Koppel, though, had been a close friend for over 20 years and surely knew that Spence did not have a teenage son.
Yeah, and that's why you should... Not you, and everybody in the audience should always be wary. As soon as you hear, you have to dig for this stuff. Any kind of so-called rent boy scandal is spin to make you think that these are adult, consenting, homosexual prostitutes, right. Male prostitutes. And by the way, male prostitutes almost always service other men. Very rarely is it that they have
they're gigolos or whatever.
Right.
Well, then there's Barney Frank, right? Barney Frank ran a male prostitution thing with his lover, right?
He had it right out of his apartment, his home there, and
he said in Congress, "Don't ever bust me because I've got names," or said something like that. Like he threatened to divulge which of these, congressmen were involved.
His Barney Frank's mentor was Roman Catholic priest Paul Shanley.
Oh my God!
Paul Shanley was one of the serial rapists that led into the Boston Spotlight scandal controversy.
The movie,
there.
Spotlight movie, right?
Paul Shanley was a co-founder of NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association. I have that in one of my chapters.
That's right. There was something like that. I'm going to send you a picture. Take a look at the message that I put up here on.
Yeah, and by the way, Paul Shanley claimed that he had a special ministry to young homosexual boys that was cleared by 3 different cardinals in Boston, the first of which was Umberto Medeiros. Pardon me.
That is so crazy. So these guys are all connected. I'm sending you a picture of Barney Frank with David Brock of Media Matters.
Oh, outstanding.
And they're at some kind of party, and Brock has a choker on. I mean, and Brock was like this head guy, probably the main person that Hillary Clinton was working with and giving money to for her presidential campaign, where she was, trying to fight people online. He was heavily involved in that, and boyfriends with James Alefantis of Pizza Ping Pong.
Comet Ping Pong Pizza there in Washington D.C. It's all connected, and here's so why crazy. I say that resistance is rising. The sincere people in Occupy and sincere Tea Partiers have to wake up and realize that this is far, far beyond political parties. Far beyond political parties. Everyone in the political parties is corrupt, particularly on the supposed right. The Republicans are not only corrupt, but they're absolute frauds. They don't even come forward with their agendas. I think that Trump's people are going to be rulers. I keep telling people, if you think that Donald Trump is going to stop illegal immigration, he won't. He'll stop illegal immigration about as quickly as Barack Obama closed Guantanamo Bay.
Right.
I have the printouts of Obama's 2008 promises that was in the top 10. I want to say it was number 8. It was top 10. Was to close Guantanamo Bay. And surprise, surprise, you guys, if you think you're on the left, actually that's a really is an agenda that is for us. That's a populist agenda, because what happens at Guantanamo Bay is they torture innocent Middle Easterners to turn them into jihadis.
Right.
Because the global war on terror doesn't exist. It's a complete fabrication.
Well, it has to continue. You've got to have an enemy, right? So you create them.
Right.
You make them pissed off, send them back
and so
over
where
to
do
Syria.
they bring them? They bring them to our communist enemies nation of Cuba. And we have a base there. And how is that possible? Because Cuba has been run by the Castro family, which is devout Roman Catholics, Jesuit trained. And that is who is behind the war on terror.
Where did the Castros go to school? Do you know? Did they go to school in Cuba? Wasn't Castro educated in the States?
Fidel, I have to look it up. Fidel went to no fewer than 3 separate Jesuit schools. Fidel did. And his brother, is it Raphael? Raul was an altar boy. Good Roman Catholic. Good Roman Catholics. Right. And they've always been in tight with the church. The Vatican has played games with them off and on, or pretending to be against them, but they've always been very tight. And by the way, I don't want to offend Roman Catholic brothers and sisters. Hey, look, this is about your leadership. Your leadership is absolutely poisonous, and I think a very large number of Roman Catholics can agree with us on this.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, that's another kind of focal point for this whole child pedocracy is the Catholic Church all over the world. I mean, if you look under the stones of even what was the guy from Germany? Wasn't he a guy who was involved in tons of cover-ups? It was
Ratzinger?
Ratzinger, yeah.
The Pope Benedict,
Yeah.
absolutely, whom his own brother was a serial child rapist,
See, I didn't
whom
know
he
that.
covered for. And Joseph Ratzinger, member of the Nazi Youth, who was from, I think he was the Cardinal of Bavaria, the Jesuit stronghold.
Southern Germany.
The Jesuit stronghold of Bavaria, the same place that Adam Weishaupt was from.
Ingolstadt, right?
Ingolstadt University, Jesuit University, that there and now today modern Munich, has always been a Jesuit stronghold. And Ratzinger controlled the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which is what the renamed Inquisition has become.
Right. But wasn't he involved? I vaguely remember reading that he was one of the people who moved the pedophile priests from from country to country. So they move them out of Ireland and send them to Spain and then move them around. Does that ring true to you?
Every single one, every cardinal, every bishop has played this game, and it tells the public, particularly Roman Catholics, I think what was disgusting, and I through 700 pages, 800 pages if you're including the 1,080 citations and footnotes, I chronicle again and again and again, rather than as soon as a pedophile priest becomes known to his hierarchy, rather than immediately put their foot down and hammer this priest, turn him into the police, pull him out of circulation, get him prosecuted, put in prison, they do the exact opposite. They enable the priest. They cover for the priest. They move the priest to new pastures and put this monster where he can prey upon unsuspecting children and families. And the sickest part about all that, William, are the Roman Catholic families that when they find their little girl or little boy has been raped by a priest, they take it to the church leadership.
Right, so they go right back to the problem.
And it goes and replays again and again.
Right. And I mean, that was the whole shocker about Spotlight, is when the reporters went to the lawyer and found out that he had settled multiple, tons of cases with all of these abused kids and their families. It was like, what? So you guys have already come back to the church and settled this? Nothing's come public? That was one of the big
the propaganda of that movie, the reason why that movie was allowed to be made is the lie that the Boston Globe does its job. It absolutely does not. Neither does any major paper. But it still is an excellent movie to elucidate the control that the Vatican has. Another propaganda psyop from the movie is, that's just Boston where the Catholic Church has a lot of power. No. That's everywhere.
Everywhere, right.
Everywhere.
Well, an interesting thing is there was that big debate between Trump and Hillary Clinton, and there was the Cardinal of New York was there with his, all the pomp and all the outfit and everything like that. But that dude is involved in all kinds of pedophile suits. I forgot what his name was. Do you remember that? Dolan, yeah. So
That's actually the Al Smith annual dinner.
Yes, thank you. Very good.
The Al Smith dinner is Herbert Hoover, Al Smith presidential campaign. Al Smith was a governor,
he was a Catholic
devout
too,
Roman
right?
Catholic.
Yeah.
Excuse me?
Yeah, he was a Roman Catholic.
Devout Roman Catholic, governor of New York, yet another governor of New York, who also ran for president against Hoover and lost. And what came of that is the Al Smith dinner. It's an annual dinner, but it also gets a lot of coverage during presidential years, where all of the frauds in politics go to the Pope of America, which is the Cardinal of New York, the Archbishop of New York, and make him laugh. Right. And everything comes down, and they're supposed to mock themselves and each other and make the Cardinal of New York laugh, which it happens. Look up images. Of course, these images are highly copyrighted. Getty, all over it. You're not allowed to share these images. But you could do an internet surf and look up the Al Smith dinner and see every single prominent name through history from the 50s on through today. You will be shocked to see the number of people who hammed it up in front of the Cardinal of New York to make him laugh.
Right. Yeah. In July 2013, documents made public during bankruptcy proceedings showed that Cardinal Dolan had sought permission to move $75 million in church funds to protect the assets from victims of clerical abuse. Incredible.
Well, not only that, but
here's one for you. In a letter to the Vatican requesting permission to move the funds, Dolan wrote that by transferring these assets to the trust, I foresee an improved protection for these funds from any legal claim or liability. So he knew exactly what he was doing.
not only that, but many of these cardinals are themselves pedophiles are just covered for. Another cardinal of New York, Spellman, was outed by Detective Rothstein as a pedophile.
Gotcha.
The cardinals and bishops are very, very covered for. They're not allowed. I was surprised when I saw the Archbishop Cardinal Pell have complaints about him. The only complaint that was allowed to surface was one that occurred when he was in seminary. And since then, no other complaints have been allowed to surface. But he is known as the protector of Gerald Ridsdale, an absolute serial monster there in Australia. And, of course, now Cardinal Pell is the third most powerful cardinal in the world. He handles finances for the Vatican.
Incredible. It's incredible. I actually been researching like a lot of these disappearances of young men, and one of these places I focused on was St. John's. It's a private school and Catholic kind of training place that's northwest of downtown Minneapolis, and all these priests have been busted. They've paid out millions of dollars. So at the same time these priests are paying out millions of dollars, the school is raising money. So it's almost like a wealth transference scheme for this school that's in Minnesota, where they just are on a tear sexually abusing men and then raising money and just paying it out to abused victims. It's incredible. I mean, that's just another place in many places that's like that.
Boys Town is actually not just an orphanage in Omaha, Nebraska. It's a municipality. It's its own school district, and it is known as one of the wealthiest square miles in the world.
Interesting. Just because of donations from all over the country?
Oh, not donations. There's no way donations covers. I mean, if anybody has seen, I don't know if you've seen, William, I'm sure you have.
I know Omaha very well. I have relatives in Omaha, so I've actually been to Boys Town.
The Yorkshire documentary, Conspiracy of Silence,
right,
was actually a cover-up in and of itself. But it outed in 1993.
Val Peter.
Oh, yeah. Director Val Peter, Monsignor Val Peter.
I've actually shook Val Peter's hand 20 years ago.
No kidding.
Yeah. And his brother.
In that documentary admitted that the orphanage alone was raking in $5 million in so-called donations. It had a $34 million chest.
More chest
savings account. 34 of 30. And that was in $1993. And by the way, as far as I'm concerned, that documentary was an absolute cover-up. For instance, let me get the details.
Well, Boys Town is perceived in that city, in Omaha, as this very clean, very upstanding way to reform boys. Charles Manson stayed in Boys Town. So
he did for 2 weeks.
Yeah, it didn't work out for him, but
he must have experienced. He was actually recruited there by a Roman Catholic priest from a young man's prison, from a juvenile detention center. He was recruited by a priest into Boys Town, and apparently, whatever it was they had in mind to do to him, he didn't like it very much, and he skipped within 2 weeks. And I have a whole chapter dedicated to it.
It's a fascinating story, but yeah. I mean, Boys Town, on the surface, all these things have this public front that these are all benign, well-meaning things, and then you look behind the curtain, it's just incredible what goes on, what people get away with, you know. Anything else you want to cover regarding, some of the Catholic involvement in this pedocracy, or, do you want to... There were some other things in your book, like Charles McQuaid out of Ireland, and these other kind of interesting, the patron saint of NAMBLA we could talk about.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll touch on Manson a little bit because he was actually recruited there. He was recruited to Boys Town let's see if I can pull up a detail or two, by a Roman Catholic priest that who was the chaplain of a supposed public juvenile detention center. Manson was also raised in an orphanage controlled by the Knights at Gibault, Gibault.
Never heard of that. Yeah.
Another Roman, not surprised. Another Roman Catholic. The Knights of Columbus at Gibault,
Gotcha.
that was part of his experiences as a juvenile. And what is really crazy is it was a public court that put him there.
Interesting.
It was a public court that put him in a Roman Catholic orphanage. And then he was at the Plainfield Juvenile Correction Facility for boys in Indiana. And that's where a Roman Catholic priest, I can see if I grab his name real quick, Father Powers, came across him at the Plainfield Juvenile Correction Facility and recruited him for Boys Town. He had something in mind, I'm sure.
Interesting.
That Charles Manson didn't like very much. And after a very short stay, he basically escaped. And later on would be involved in this supposed cult. And several members of the cult were also Roman Catholic, Jesuit-trained Patricia Krenwinkel, who was the matron of the cult, was a Jesuit-trained Roman Catholic, and she's considered. And by the way, Charlie Manson never pulled a trigger, never killed anybody.
That's true.
The most well-known of the victims, Abigail Folger, Wojciech Frykowski, Stephen Parent. Of course, the most well-known was actress Sharon Tate, the pregnant girlfriend of Roman Polanski. Roman Polanski also has been I was going to say accused, not accused. He was arrested for the rape and sodomizing of a 13-year-old little girl when he was visiting
drugged her.
Jack Nicholson's house.
There was another accuser too, but that was the one.
He was supposed to. Let me tell you. Whenever you see a big name going to court over 2 or 3 instances, the reality is there are probably 20 or 30. And the only ones that have been allowed to make it to court are the 2 or 3 that you're hearing about. But and of course Sharon Tate, pregnant with Polanski's baby, was murdered. She was in the process of filming a movie. Guess where? In Rome. And she was about to leave for Rome within the next day or so. And it's the movie 12+1 that she was filming. She was about to go there.
She had done Eye of the Devil too, right? Where she
and of course Polanski was, let's see, what was it that Polanski did? He had
Rosemary's Baby.
Rosemary's Baby, sure. Yeah. So there was a question of, is he and it's a part of the story is that Tate was using birth control and should not have gotten pregnant, and so you never know if his diseased mind was, really, this is some kind of crazy baby. I don't want to. The reality is that he was a typical guy who wanted his cake and wanted to eat it too, and didn't want to be connected. Surprise, surprise. Now Polanski is a Jew, but Sharon Tate was Catholic.
Interesting. And
Sharon Tate's Catholic background, even though she was living as a free sex, free love Hollywood hippie, her Roman Catholicism was getting the best of her, and she wanted to be married by the time the baby was born.
Interesting.
And that was part of what did her in. I'm convinced. Of course, I'm speaking out. And Vincent Bugliosi was his prosecutor, and also, interestingly, his biographer.
Right, that's true.
And Bugliosi was also supposed lapsed Roman Catholic and atheist, which is a very common theme. And I was trying to tech before we had a technical difficulty. I was trying to explain to you how the connections there in Omaha of how Boys Town has been completely rewritten to be a scandal that's centered on the Franklin Federal Credit Union and Lawrence King.
Right. Like it's a limited hangout, right? They just focus on one person and don't focus on the totality of the whole. And I mean, it's the same thing happened with Sandusky and all that. It was just Sandusky, but all those other people are creepy as hell. Sandusky's friends. I mean, that was probably going on for decades. The second mile.
Sandusky was a facilitator, just like Lawrence King was a facilitator, just like Jeffrey Epstein is a facilitator.
Yep.
Middlemen.
Yep. Excellent point.
It's
really true.
And what it was that scandal in Omaha was rewritten by Nebraska State Senator John DeCamp.
So do you think that was intentional on his part?
It was absolutely intentional. It was guided. He was told to do that by Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger. Wow. I have that information in my book. He was told by Cardinal Ratzinger to redirect the attention. How it is that you can talk about child sex slave trafficking in Omaha and call it the Franklin cover-up, which is, by the way, the title of John DeCamp's book.
Supposedly, he's this paragon of honesty and integrity.
And in reality, he was the guy that decided to step up for Alicia Owen. Alicia Owen, child victim, was what they did was there was 3 victims that came forward, in particular, that were interviewed by private investigator Gary Caradori. And as soon as the Nebraska legislature realized that they weren't going to get any help, of course they weren't going to get help, because one of the people that Alicia Owen said had raped her repeatedly was Police Chief Robert Wadman.
Wadman, right.
Robert Wadman, by the way, is not a name you're going to get from the Yorkshire Conspiracy of Silence documentary, the supposed buried documentary.
Right.
And Robert Wadman, Alicia Owen said that he impregnated her in one of these parties where he had raped her. So that when they realized they weren't getting any help from local law enforcement, they hired a private investigator, Gary Caradori, who was doing his own research and getting pretty far on it until he had a plane accident and he was flying to Chicago.
I think he was flying back from Chicago, right? But didn't he say that he had
gone to Chicago?
He had told people he had all the documents and all the stuff. He had all the material.
In the meantime, Robert Wadman had transferred to Aurora, Illinois, which was a suburb of Chicago, where he was the chief of police there. And interestingly enough, Gary Caradori and his son, his young 8-year-old son AJ, were flying back from the All-Star game. The cover was for him to go enjoy the All-Star game with his son, but he was also doing research there. And on his way back, that's when his plane exploded and fell very conveniently into the jurisdiction of Robert Wadman.
Yeah, incredible.
And so that was part of what happened. The FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, that I call the Federal Bureau of Obfuscation, one of the biggest criminal cartels in the world, period, founded by Roman Catholic Charles Joseph Bonaparte, great grandnephew of Napoleon Bonaparte. The number of Catholic directors are insane, right up to James Comey, the guy who claims there's nothing wrong with Hillary's email.
Right. There's no intent. There's no intent.
John Podesta, he doesn't want anybody to look at John Podesta's emails. He doesn't want anybody to look at Hillary Clinton's emails. Devout Roman Catholic.
They're all anodyne, right? Isn't that what Hillary Clinton said? The spirit cooking is anodyne.
It's no big deal. Really, it's not a big deal. So what the
semen,
FBI
pig's
does,
blood, come on, writing on the walls, blah blah blah.
Our greatest enemies are our own institutions. The FBI. Every time there's a major tragedy, major crime, the FBI shows up to obfuscate, cover up evidence, bully victims.
Distort everything. You hear all these stories where they come in and distort the record and actually change witness testimony.
TW 800, a great documentary about how FBI agents came in and started mucking with evidence there that was almost certainly shot down. What they did was they came in to Omaha. Of the 3 victims who had come forward, who had the courage to come forward, Alicia Owen, Troy Bonner, and Paul Bonacci, they quickly realized that Troy was the weakest link. They focused on him. They pressured him. They got him to flip, and they used him against Alicia Owen.
Right. There's that famous phone call, or there's that notorious where he's trying to, isn't he trying to turn her?
Where he's trying to entrap her to
like
get her to incriminate herself.
Right.
And he's sitting right there with FBI agents who have flipped him, and regardless of whether it worked or not, she actually stayed pretty strong on that phone call. It didn't matter because she was convicted of 5 counts of perjury.
That's right.
Of 5 years each, and they gave her 25 years in prison for perjury.
Such a crime. It's such a crime.
Lawrence King was given 15 years because he had the nerve to embezzle $38 million from the Franklin Federal Credit Union. You know who had a very large number of accounts at the Franklin Federal Credit Union? Boys Town.
Not surprised. Not surprised at all. Larry King sang the national anthem at the 1984 Republican Convention.
And the 88 Republican National Convention.
So he did them both.
Both 84 and 88.
Here's an interesting story. I'll tell you a personal story. When I moved to D.C., I was in D.C. from 93 to 96. And I was in Northern Virginia. I stayed in Northern Virginia the whole time. But in Northern Virginia, he had somehow moved. I think he got out of jail early. And he had moved to Northern Virginia and sold cars, is my understanding. Because somebody I know had ran into him. Does that sound correct?
It does. I don't have the details on that, but I can tell you that. Oh my goodness.
But one of the interesting things is why would he move to D.C.? That I found interesting. So he still found some protection or connection to, the nation's capital.
Absolutely, he was totally covered for, and the only thing that he did wrong was to embezzle from the Catholic Church. That's what brought the heat. That's what brought the government. You know that one of the prosecutor, the guy who prosecuted Jeffrey Dahmer, was a Jesuit priest.
I had no idea. No idea. Not surprised.
His defense attorney, who did a horrible job, was trained by the Jesuits at Marquette.
Gotcha.
Monsignor Robert Hupp, who was also a director at Boys Town, was made a United States government representative to the United Nations on the matters of children.
Wow, that's scary. It's basically the fox in the henhouse. You know?
It is that outrageous that they take these monsters and put them in the very positions where they do the most harm, or they mock us the most.
Well, that's interesting because that came up in the whole Pizzagate research, is that some of these attorneys that are overseeing were actually involved or friends with a lot of these guys in these Instagram pictures. They were liking these Instagram pictures, and people said, well, who's that person? It's the freaking federal prosecutor for the Southern District of Maryland or D.C. It's incredible. There were a couple people like that. Like, how did you get in? And one of the people, I think there was an attorney who owned Beast Pizza with the pedophile sign, turned out to be an attorney,
They mock us with all of this. When part of this that came out, they had Michael Thomas Flynn, Army General Sr., was, of course, Irish Roman Catholic, was Jesuit-trained Donald Trump's pick for national security advisor. Now, the problem was, they called it Pizzagate because they were playing with fire. They wanted to use it to get their leg up. Now, at the level of Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, the real power players, which I am convinced are the Jesuits and the Vatican, don't care because either team is thoroughly in their camp.
Probably.
Hillary Clinton, diseased, sexual deviant, Her and her husband were empowered by a mountain of cocaine trafficked by the CIA through Mena, Arkansas.
And all the money laundering and everything.
Jesuit-trained Bill Clinton, thoroughly in their camp. She picked Tim Kaine, senator from Virginia,
Right.
devout Roman Catholic, Jesuit-trained in high school, Jesuit-trained in college, even went on a mission trip with the Jesuits, and he vowed one of the very first things that a Clinton-Kaine administration would do would be to finish off legalizing the tens of millions of Roman Catholics south of the border illegal aliens who had come up. On the other side, you have Donald John Trump, trained by the Jesuits for 2 years at Fordham. They realized he was going to be very useful to them, and so they transferred to where they have control of a public university, University of Pennsylvania. I prove that in my book, also controlled by the Jesuits incognito, but it allows them to give their puppets a public degree, which is what not only he did that, but Ivanka did that too. I think she did 2 years at Georgetown under the Jesuits, and then she transferred to the University of Pennsylvania. So they wanted this to get called Pizzagate because at their level, they're playing games. They're playing cutthroat games, and they wanted it to be a temporary campaign scandal the way Watergate was. And when the campaign is over, it gets swept back under the rug. It was Pizzagate.
Yeah, ignore it. Well, pizza is the symbol for it's some kind of symbol for, it's a pedophile symbol, you know, for little girls.
It is
a
pizza. It is their these bastards, their sick connection to genitalia. Pizza and hot dogs are their sick code for connection to genitalia.
Right. But, I mean, here, yeah, so... Yeah.
And I had another example for you if you wanted to. Them mocking us. In 2010, we had that terrible earthquake in Haiti.
Right.
And we had a supposed businesswoman from Idaho named Laura Silsby.
Right.
Who had conned a collection of 8 Baptist missionaries to go to Haiti to rescue children. Well, the children that they rescued 33 of them, an
interesting number, right?
And they rescued children by basically kidnapping them.
Right, they still had parents and everything like that. They found out later, right?
They talked the parents into... In their very, very poor country that has just been devastated by a massive earthquake.
It still hasn't recovered. Still hasn't recovered.
And as far as I'm concerned, they also use money to bribe these families to release these children into their care, supposedly for education and for safekeeping. And in reality, it was for child sex slave trafficking. They instead of, you know, what a real relief effort would do would be to take these kids through government authorities and take them by boat or by plane back to a real orphanage where they could be taken care of.
Right.
But instead, they snuck them to the Dominican border.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and that's where they were caught. That's why they were caught and arrested, because they didn't have the proper paperwork.
Interesting.
Her and her nanny were arrested. The judge in Haiti immediately recognized that the 8 Baptist missionaries were basically a beard, basically a cover, and they were released. And the judge held Silsby and her nanny for conspiracy and trafficking.
And they went to jail for a little bit, didn't they?
They were sitting in jail when Hillary Clinton had her hubby, Bill, personally intervene on their behalf. Bill flew to Haiti. They rigged a deal. She was released, and guess where she ended up? By the time of the so-called Pizzagate scandal in 2016, she was now Laura Silsby-Gaylor,
right,
the vice president of marketing at AlertSense. AlertSense is an Amber Alert government contractor.
So crazy.
So basically, they would kidnap the little kids, and then they would get paid by the taxpayers to tell their parents, hey, here's an Amber Alert, we just kidnapped your little kid.
It's so crazy. And the interesting thing is that the Haitian, I mean, that was just one story. There might have been stories that came out that nobody has ever seen, but in the Instagram, in the Elephantis Instagrams, there was a reference to Haitian sauce or Haitian something. Haitian walnut sauce, which is supposedly like an ethnic term, but it was incredible that ties into all these inside jokes that these awful people were saying.
Yeah, they think they're funny.
Yeah.
But
they have the code word. They do have those codes, and there are other pizza places around the country and other weird restaurants and other cities that share the same iconography and codes.
Well, we had that supposed shooting
right
at Comet Ping Pong Pizza by the actor Edgar Madison Welch, who has his own IMDb page, who supposedly went into Washington, D.C. wielding a deadly AR-15. How it is that he got an AR-15 in Washington, D.C., a city where I crack a joke in my book that if you're sitting on the commode reading a gun magazine, you get a SWAT team popping through your window because that's how restrictive the gun laws are in Washington, D.C. So you got this actor who bursts into Comet Ping Pong Pizza wielding the AR-15. He squeezes off a single round that lodges in the restaurant's computer.
Right.
And no other damage is done because we really are that stupid. In 2010, Edgar Madison Welch was in Haiti building shelters for children.
I didn't know that. That's incredible. So his backstory, he's an actor who was in Haiti probably with these other people.
At the same time as Laura Sills began.
And how much money did the Clintons loot out of Haiti? $10 billion that's just missing and only 2 houses have been built or something?
And talk about a nation that has been thoroughly controlled by the Catholic Church from Papa Doc, Baby Doc, Duvalier, all those monsters, absolute monsters. Nobody even knows how many
people
Haitians
killed,
have been murdered,
what was
tortured.
it, the Tauntaun Makouts or whatever? It would go around.
Yeah.
People, yeah.
Good for you. Absolutely. They're secret police of Duvalier, based on a amalgamation of Creole and Voodoo and Roman Catholicism. Basically just a big psyop, and he used that as part of his terror tactic. Maybe as many as 60,000 Haitians were tortured, murdered, disappeared by Papa Doc Duvalier.
And the elites there live in luxury, and the rest of the population is worse than poverty. That's where it is everywhere. Yeah, they actually subsidize their caloric intake with pies made of mud. So
it is absolutely heinous.
Yeah.
Heinous. And whenever there's any reason for an intervention by a nation like the United States, that's to set things right for the Vatican. Which is what happened when Bill Clinton intervened in Haiti. See if I can grab the details for that. Let's see here.
I don't remember that. I don't remember that intervention. I remember there being a power quest after the Duvaliers. I can't remember what happened.
Well, of course there was. Good grief! That's what happens when you write 700 freaking pages. It's hard to find hard to get to the. It's in the Haiti. It's in the Silsby Haiti chapter. It's got to be. So what happened in Haiti is you had this intervention of Jean-Baptiste
Aristide,
who was a Jesuit priest.
Oh, I didn't. That's right. Yeah, that's another whole series of dramas down there. Holy smokes!
Yeah, he was brought back in to power on the backs of American soldiers.
That's right. That's what they did. They put him in power. But there is like a pedophilia thing that happens down there also in Dominican Republic. Isn't Menendez, that state senator, I mean, yeah, from New Jersey, isn't he supposedly wrangled up and tied up and going to
Absolutely.
Dominican
Good for you.
Republic?
Absolutely.
Right.
And I got one more. There was an army major who was there in Haiti to help install Jean-Baptiste Aristide, and his name was Michael Thomas Flynn.
Get out. The general?
Michael Thomas Flynn was a major who was personally involved in placing Jesuit priest Aristide back into power.
Fascinating.
And he would later become the supposed disgraced NSA because his son was playing the Pizzagate game a little too seriously,
right,
and being controversial and tweeting things out, drawing
probably
too
didn't
much
help
attention.
him, yeah. You don't rock the boat, guys. Come on. Yeah.
Absolutely. This is just a game. We're playing it a little bit, and you're taking it too seriously, so you're going to have to step down. And I have a clip. I have an audio clip, and I reference it. I cite it in my book, where Jake Tapper of CNN,
whose favorite restaurant is Comet Ping Pong, right? Or isn't that his wife's favorite restaurant?
Jennifer Tapper's favorite place to bring the kids is Comet Ping Pong Pizza. That's in an article by the Washingtonian.
That's right.
And her favorite place, her favorite date night place, was Buck's Camping and Fishing,
right? Which is also
owned by James Alefantis.
There's a kind of a infamous pedophile documentary, the name of which I can't remember, but in that documentary, the pedophiles refer to each other as Bucks. It's like an inside term.
And there's that.
Yeah. So
well done.
A comet is like a relationship that heats up and flames out. You know, so it's a short-term personal relationship. And then ping pong has all kinds of weird sexual terminology, you know? It's a sexual term. Ping pong.
There was also a reference.
All sexually charged.
Yes, there was also a reference in one of the many remakes. Vladimir Nabokov in 1954 wrote Lolita.
Right.
As a fictional novel about a pedophile named Humbert Humbert.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's had several remakes, and one of them, I want to say Stanley Kubrick.
Yes, that's correct.
Did one of them with James Mason and Peter Sellers, and in the beginning, Sellers asked James Mason to a game of Roman ping pong.
Right, that's right. So like, there's all these hints and nods. Yeah.
And you only get them if you're in if you're part of the in crowd. Oh, we have the pedophilia symbolism, like the triangle within a triangle,
right,
that I show in my book is actually printed on sheriff's badges, deputy badges.
It's amazing. Have you ever seen the one? What is it? Baldwin, where there's a commercial. I have it on my YouTube channel. William Ramsey Investigates. He's in a commercial where they're playing ping pong, and there's the ping pong symbol there, and all these occult numbers, and I'm like,
which Baldwin? Alec Baldwin,
yeah,
the guy
Baldwin,
who was the frequent guest of James Alefantis to his orgy island.
Really? So yeah, Baldwin was involved.
Baldwin's on the guest list. Oh yeah.
Oh wow.
Oh, very large.
Know that. There's so many famous people on there. Courtney Love, the guy from House of Cards, whatever his name is. I mean, there's just so many.
Well, yeah, you wonder about what happened to her husband when you see how plugged in she is.
Oh, no question. Do you think that she's not connected to sketchy people?
Very often. I mean, you have
who benefits from the death of Kurt Cobain if you're married to him? Right.
Absolutely. And she rode him. She rode that very effectively. Got where she wanted to go. You have a lot of these.
Is fully into the occult. You should see the daughter's Instagram account. That's incredible.
It's almost like a favor from the Godfather of for this satanic Godfather. You go and you get a favor. I'm absolutely convinced that Jackie Kennedy did that with John the 23rd.
Really?
And when was he murdered? 1963? Was it November 11th?
November 22nd.
22nd. And it was 1963, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
And it was a year prior in 62 that she had a personal audience with John the 23rd. And I'm absolutely convinced that that was part of the impetus where she had complained to John the 23rd about Jack's embarrassing adulteries. Yeah. And that was just the final impetus. They had more than enough reason to do him in. They really...
There was conspiracies around that guy. He made enemies with everybody. I mean, he should
I
have
think
seen
the
it
worst
coming,
thing the worst thing he ever did was to threaten to smash the CIA into 1,000 parts and scatter it to the winds, because the CIA is organized crime.
No
Period.
question, yeah.
The CIA is organized crime everywhere, and if you take out what I call the Catholic Intelligence Agency, I've got a Catholic Herald News column where they sheepishly admit there are so many Catholics at the agency that they call it Catholics in Action. So if you threaten the CIA, and then you make yourself really, really vulnerable with this terrible behavior, I mean, you had they felt that they had him blackmailed. Yeah. With sex slaves like Marilyn Monroe, and he didn't care. He was going to have his cake and eat it too. He was going to run around with his pants down and then try to be his own president at the same time. You couldn't have a more dangerous, volatile combination. And
they say he had a psychotic break. You know, he was doing LSD was funneled through him from Timothy Leary to Mary Pinchot Meyer to John, was one of his lovers, to John F. Kennedy while he's a president. Guy was freaking dosing, you know, crazy.
Well, that fits perfectly because what they gave tactical command of the assassination to Cord Meyer.
Cord Meyer, his wife,
and that's from E. Howard Hunt. Cord Meyer was the tactical commander of the assassination because Jack had humiliated him by having sex with his wife.
And there was a lot of weird things, like Kennedy seemed to be really gloat in front of people's faces and play little mind games like that. The time he didn't shake the hand of, who was the CIA head at that time? It was John Foster Dulles. No, it was one of the Dulles brothers. You ever see that picture?
Alan Dulles.
Yeah, he refuses to shake Alan Dulles' hand. So there's a lot of things that just piss tons of people off. Yeah.
He fired Dulles after the Bay of Pigs. Right. And by the way, the Bay of Pigs was yet another sickening, disgusting, despicable betrayal of patriots in a communist country. I have listed this in Secret History and referenced it again in Eaters of Children, how the CIA, the Catholics in Action, played this unbelievably traitorous game of trying to get patriots in oppressed communist nations to revolt, to out themselves so that they could step back and let the power of that communist nation, which is controlled by the Catholic Church, crush those patriots. They did it at least 3 times that I have chronicled.
That's interesting.
In Hungary, in Czechoslovakia, and at the Bay of Pigs. Each and every time, unbelievable traitors at the CIA and MI6 put dramatic effort into getting good patriots in those nations to rise up and revolt under the promise of help from the West. And as soon as they do, those traitors turn their backs and turn them over to those communist nations where they can therefore be crushed. And it was absolutely planned. The Bay of Pigs was not a scandal, not an accident, not an aberration. It was absolutely planned treason from the beginning. And I believe that Jack Kennedy was in the dark about it. He one of the reasons why he fired Alan Dulles. Well, that's the last thing you're going to do. Oh, Alan Dulles, the Episcopalian Alan Dulles, with his brother, Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, both good Episcopalians. That's why John Foster Dulles, his son Avery, became a Jesuit priest later to climb to be one of the most powerful Jesuit cardinals in the United States and therefore in the world. Avery Dulles. Episcopalians, yeah, that's why he's a powerful Jesuit priest.
I've never heard of Avery Dulles. That's interesting.
Oh, huge power player, and that's why you haven't heard of. You never heard of a name like Jean-Pierre de Smet, Desmet. Also, one of the most powerful men in the world in the 1800s, was the king of the Western United States. He was the handler of Albert Pike, who helped create
Masonry, yeah. Morals and dogma.
Freemasonry, the KKK, Mormonism, all of that.
It's incredible.
I'm sorry, Pierre-Jean, not Jean-Pierre. Pierre-Jean. Pierre-Jean de Smet, another invisible power player. Trying to recall the name of the Leonard Neal was the Jesuit priest who was at the bedside of George Washington on his death.
Interesting.
Father Leonard Neal, Jesuit priest. The White House is named after Jesuit Andrew White, who gave the property to the government, not based on its color. It's named after, it's on Capitol Hill, which is named after Capitoline Hill, one of the 7 hills of Rome. That's why capitals of government all over the world are called capitals, because it traces back to Rome. As a matter of fact, it wasn't known as Washington, D.C. It was known as Little Rome on the Tiber, and later Little Rome on the Potomac, and then later Washington, D.C.
Amazing history, yeah.
Buried, absolutely buried. The architect, Pierre-Charles L'Enfant,
Right.
devout Roman Catholic and Freemason.
Right,
And
so
I've got
it's
that in
together,
Illuminati
right.
Mass. Both. The supposed arch enemies of Freemasonry and the Catholic Church.
Right.
Not. The architect behind it. And you have the same sex magic in Washington, D.C. of the massive phallus of Osiris across from the massive domed uterus of Isis.
Right.
Designed to encourage the birth of the messianic child Horus. Or that traces back from Egypt even further to Babylon. The same sex, Aleister Crowley sex magic.
Right. Uniting
instead,
of opposites a whole bit, yeah.
Right. Instead with Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz.
It's incredible, man. It's really just incredible. Like I was in D.C. at that time, 93, 96. I had no idea. Just walk around. Wasn't amazing. You walk by the House of the Temple. You know where that is, with the 2 huge sphinxes that say knowledge and wisdom. Those sphinxes represent the what is it? To know, to will, to dare, and remain silent. It's like a Masonic credo. And,
it's St. John Nepomuc. Is the patron saint at Bohemian Grove.
Right. With
There's
the
a
sign of
statue
silence.
of
He's
him.
making the sign of silence. Yeah.
He's got his finger on his lips because he was supposedly executed for failing to give up the
confessions,
secrets
right?
of the confession.
In Bohemia, right? So there's the Bohemian connection for that St. John.
And the Bohemian Club is a Roman Catholic club. It's a knights club.
I didn't know that. So they're all knights of some Catholic order?
It's come up. I'll give you the order. Bohemian Club.
when
It is
I
the
lived
order.
when I lived in San Francisco, I lived on the same street as the Bohemian Club, Taylor intersects. So I would walk by the Bohemian Club all the time, and pretty interesting building.
Yeah.
One of the interesting aspects of the Bohemian Club, or the club is actually the center. The Grove is where they all go every summer, and at the club, when they have the statue of St. John of Nepomuc, they bring that out every year. So it goes from the club, they do some kind of strange ritual at the club, and then they take it to the Grove, and then they do it again. And everybody makes their oath of silence. Nobody's going to say anything that happens here.
And they seal them in that oath with the rape, torture, and abuse of children. Once you get someone in to rape, torture, and or murder a child, you've got them.
You own them, right? And that's actually very common throughout all occult orders. Oaths of silence. Oaths that you will be quoted.
And that's what seals the oath.
Yeah.
It is the Order of Saint Hubertus.
Hubertus, fascinating. I didn't know that.
And it is, surprise, surprise, marked by a Maltese cross. I have that in my book.
Fascinating. I did not, I've been by there. I've known about that. There it is.
Nobody knows the Roman Catholic background. That's part of what Alex Jones is all about. He's the John DeCamp of Bohemian Grove.
Right.
Is to
you don't tell the full story.
The Roman Catholic.
Yeah. The International Order. Here it is. The St. Hubertus is a worldwide organization of Knightly Order of Wildlife Conservation. That's a nice cover order. The order was founded in 1965 by Anton von Spork, who brought together noble hunters from Austria and Bohemia.
1695.
1695. Yeah. Sorry.
Yep. And it goes back to and that's Bohemia is also code for sexual chaos, anarchy, and hedonism.
Right, hedonism.
You ever hear someone being called a bohemian? Yes. It's a combination of the geographic area of Czechoslovakia, but it's also a code for someone who is a complete sexual anarchist and hedonist. Yeah, and that's part of what that whitewash from Alex Jones was, the idea that, it's just an act. Meanwhile, we have all kinds of victims, Kathy O'Brien, Paul Bonacci, David Scherter, who are saying they were there and they were abused at the Grove and they watched children being tortured and murdered at the Grove. It wasn't an act. It wasn't a play. It was the real thing.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about O'Brien and Scherter offline.
Sure. Well, listen, everyone is flawed. That's why.
Well, I wouldn't even say I wouldn't say their personality. Some of the stories don't add up. So
there's and that's also part of it, is to intimately sow truth with lies, so that there is constant muddying of waters, and it's very, very difficult. Of course, that's why Kathy O'Brien never appears without her Knight of Malta husband as her handler and controller. She may not even realize that she's being handled and controlled.
Well, she may not. That's an excellent point. She may not. But Ed Opperman did an interview with her, and to answer certain questions, she had to ask him, like, what's the answer? Like, she didn't actually have
it's all controlled. And by the way, I'm kind of disappointed that Ed won't talk about these subjects either. He stops well short of where I take all the way through to the end, which is Rome and the Vatican and the Jesuits. I think Ed understands that, and he may be hedging himself as a way of protecting himself. And,
you never know.
And that's
I don't know.
It's not why I do what I'm doing. I'm nobody. I'm just an author. I'm just a speaker. I'm not a household name, but I'm going to do what I think is right, and it's going to allow me to sleep at night. And I don't hold it against folks that know the truth and hold it to themselves, but I do hold it against them if they're in the public arena and people know them as supposed purveyors of truth, and they're holding back very, very important information. It's like I keep quoting on my show, Resistance Rising, the scene in Captain America where you got Red Skull with Hydra, cut off one head that two more shall grow in its place. If you don't know the root cause, then you can spin your wheels against symptoms until kingdom come. It will never end until you cut off the right head. And that's why it's critical for people who know the truth but are afraid to go the full 100 yards with it, that they're doing a disservice to their audience, and it's disingenuous. So, not to name names, but
no, that's completely fair. We're coming to the end of. We've gone for 2 hours. It's gone fast. But anything you want to wrap up? Let's go over kind of where people can reach you, talk about the book, and anything else you might want to add. Anything we want to cover?
I think. God bless you, William. I absolutely adore you, your work, and your show. I think this is it, man. It doesn't get more serious than this. Everyone who is in power partakes of this, and they all have, very often. By the way, Johnny Cirucci, JOHNNYCIRUCCI, JohnnyCirucci.com, Johnny@JohnnyCirucci.com. All three books, Illuminati Unmasked, Secret History, and Eaters of Children, are available on Amazon. I use my full name, Giovanni Agostino Cirucci, for Eaters of Children. Just look up Cirucci, and all three of my books will come up together on Amazon.
Is there a way to obtain signed copies?
Yes, it has to. You have to work with me on it. I was doing a deal. If anybody wanted to donate, I was calling it a $50 donation. I'll cover it, everything. The way to get around that, if you want to buy the book and just cover the shipping, you just have it. It's got to come to me first. I don't have a reserve of books. Just work with me, and I'll be very pleased to do that.
Just contact you either through Facebook,
Johnny
or
at johnnycirucci.com, and I will make you happy no matter what. Awesome. I don't have a large reserve of either books or cash. Okay. So I if I did, trust me, the first thing I do, I'd be handing these things away, because the more of these that get out, the happier I am. But the show is Resistance Rising on Blog Talk Radio. And this particular subject, I think this may be one of the most important things I've ever done, because it explains to you how they maintain control, how it is possible to have a conspiracy that is kept quiet. And they have mocked us, William, again and again, with, when we question things like the moon landing and question 9/11 and question the Kennedy assassination. We question the official story, and they mock us with the supposed impossibility of how to keep such a thing secret. Right. This is it, brother. This is it. Once you rape and abuse and torture and murder a child, you're in. And I also want to say, you think this is the end, and it's really not. It's really not the end. There's always the possibility for you to make things right. It may cost you, but what is it not worth it? There are a very, very large number of people who have been pulled into this evil, evil system that hate themselves, that hate that they thought they were doing what was best for them, and it really turned out to be a horrible nightmare. And I want to encourage them, as long as you draw breath, it's not over. There's always an opportunity to make things right, and the people who are going to do the most damage to this system are already on the inside. And that's my effort. That's my goal, is to call out to people who feel that they don't have a way out, and to encourage them to find the courage, to face the music, to face their past, and to be able to make things right. Awesome. And I really feel surely that it's going to happen. There's a reason why the past 2 or 3 years have been the most amazing. As insider information has come out, the elites have done everything they can to muddy the waters, as we said earlier, yep. to try and dilute this. It cracks in the dike, yep, fingers in the dam. They cannot stop it.
Can't stop it. No, it's true. I mean, those Podesta emails were incredible. There was a real insight into the pedophilia that you're talking about, the sex magic, weird blood rituals. I mean, it was amazing.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
That's it. That's the stuff that he just casually let loose. I mean, imagine what's going on behind the scenes.
The President of the United States, Donald John Trump, is a partaker. He would not have made it into office. Had Hillary Clinton made it into office, she equally is both a sexual deviant and serial criminal. They're all in it. That's how you have access to power. And the other thing I want to say is, there's always a choice. There's always a choice. Many of the people who are partakers in what I call the devil simulation, the pedocracy, are themselves victims. They even as a victim, you have a choice. You can either allow yourself to be warped by what happened to you, so that you flip it and you all of a sudden become someone who is an abuser, or you can take your experiences and use that to fight with. And it's amazing, this dichotomy, even within victims. I think Michael Jackson is an excellent example. Someone who clearly was scarred by childhood experiences, almost absolutely guaranteed to have been a victim of child sexual assault. The confusion over his personal identity was a symptom of that. The addiction, the surgical addiction was a symptom of that. And instead of taking his personal experiences and using them to fight back against the system, he allowed himself to be brought into the system and abuse children at where his Neverland Ranch. All of these, Peter Pan, Neverland, Alice in Wonderland, these authors, J.M. Barrie, they're all pedophiles, dude.
Yeah.
They're all pedophiles. Disney. Why is it that Disney has so many different examples of pornographic allusions in their cartoons? Media would mock it and make fun. Say, "Oh, see that? Here's another cartoonist that was just trying to get back at his company because he didn't get the bonus he was looking for." Not even remotely accurate. It goes all the way to the top. Well, Disney himself was a pedophile deviant who was a member of the Jacques de Molay Boys Club as a child, and the purpose of planting these images in these cartoons is to sexualize our children, is to plant these subliminal suggestions so that your children can be the next round of victims.
It's incredible. It's really incredible. All right, Johnny, I appreciate you taking the couple hours to explain the book. I feel like we just kind of didn't cover more than a quarter of all the information in there. It's a long book. I know that you're a very detailed researcher, so anybody who purchases it will definitely get their money's worth. So I really appreciate it. Again, Johnny Cirucci. The title of the book is Eaters of Children, The Pedocracy Exposed. How Access to Power is Granted Through the Rape, Torture, and Ritualistic Slaughter of the Innocent by Johnny Cirucci. Available on Amazon.com. Thank you.